The society is the sponsoring entity of the clinical study. So, in place of examples that you just shared, a company or an individual research organization, the society is the named sponsor. And so, how we got that done was by raising funds through grant mechanisms that ultimately support the project. And then SIO is the ownership of the scientific content, management of the protocol, and ultimately the lead voice in running that particular project.
This is Associations Thrive, the podcast celebrating successful associations and their leaders. I'm your host, Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. Listen in as top association executives tell all, revealing the creative and innovative ways they're increasing membership, generating revenue, nurturing engagement, and reimagining their organizations. By the way, if you've launched a new initiative, created new member services, or updated your governance structure and are seeing great results, I want to hear your story, and so do my listeners. I'd love to have you as a guest. Go to podcast.matrixgroup.net and apply to be on Associations Thrive. Now let's dive into this week's show. Today, I'm speaking with Jena Stack, Executive Director of the Society of Interventional Oncology, or SIO. Jena, welcome to the show.
Hi, Joanna. Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us about SIO.
The Society of Interventional Oncology is a medical specialty organization that primarily serves interventional radiologists that treat cancer, all kinds of cancer. And the way that they do that is by using minimally invasive image-guided procedures that target the disease deep inside the body. And these therapies are delivered typically through small incisions in the skin, often as small as pinholes. And so there's a minimally invasive approach to treating the disease at the organ level. And it's a great benefit for patients because there's definitely a reduced risk of recovery time, reduces pain and other side effects that full body chemotherapy and other drugs can have on a cancer patient as they're going through treatment. So it's a really novel approach to fighting cancer, and it's a privilege to work with these guys.
Jena, I'm always fascinated by these different associations, and my kids say, Mom, there's an association for everything. Interventional oncology as opposed to another type of treatment. So like in the space of cancer care, is this something new? Has it been around for a while? And why is it kind of its own society, its own thing?
It's a great question, and one we get asked often because, when you think about cancer treatment, it's usually kind of the big three, right? Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. And interventional is really an emerging fourth pillar. And that's the mission of the society and really the heart of the vision and the establishment of the Society of Interventional Oncology. And the treatments have been around in some form for several decades, but really we've seen probably in the last 25 years or so an exponential increase in use of these therapies, more approvals, and the different drugs that are delivered. And so when we think about the options that patients have, interventional really is what we would consider a fourth pillar. Those physicians that deliver these therapies through these minimally invasive modalities are partnering on the cancer care team. They're not doing this in a vacuum. They are partnering with the medical oncologist, the radiation oncologist, the hepatologist. They're definitely a part of this multidisciplinary team sport and have been at the forefront and the cutting edge really of developing and inventing in many ways these modalities with interventional radiology that have the ability to target, treat, cure cancer. And it's different for different disease states in the body, but that's kind of the story of how IO came to be and how we think about it when you consider your options for treatment care.
Jena, who are your members?
The members of SIO are physicians. They would identify as interventional radiologists. So they're coming from the radiology side of the house, so to speak, when you're talking about medical care and where the home is that these physicians would identify with. So they are experts in image guided techniques and using image guided therapy to treat cancer. And often some of them are doing vascular work as well. So the interventional radiologist is not necessarily a cancer doctor, so to speak. Many of them will specialize in that, but there are also vascular conditions that they treat as well that an interventional radiologist is a part of. And so SIO obviously specializes on the cancer side of that, but that is the physician that we are serving primarily as our key target audience.
I see. Jena, physicians are your members, but do you have other categories of members as well, like nurses or PhDs or hospital administrators?
Yeah, I mean, the society serves the cancer community when it comes to interventional care. So the primary, I would say, target member is the interventional radiologist, but we do have membership structures that serve allied health professionals, and we have a corporate structure for our industry partners that are our key partnerships within the society. And so there's different structures of audiences that we have. And when it comes to the healthcare community specifically, often what you'll see is nurses or nurse navigators, for example, will have their home society. SIO is establishing mechanisms to partner with those other organizations. So they may not be direct members to SIO necessarily, but we are building mechanisms to reach them. And part of that is through the partnership with the interventional physician and the different members of the cancer care team that they're working with, which have a tendency to be members of like nursing organizations or hepatology, et cetera.
Hmm. Well, Jena, it sounds like SIO is experiencing incredible growth, and we're going to talk about that growth in a second. But before we do that, I want to talk about your journey. So how'd you get to become executive director of SIO?
My professional journey started in higher education. I earned my master's in that field and thought I was going to spend my career in student affairs, wanted to be a dean of students or a vice president of student affairs. And just, I loved the ability to connect to mission and give back in a service oriented way. And shortly after I earned my master's degree, I was in a position as a resident director and was in kind of a workplace culture that was, I would describe as pretty toxic. And I really struggled to, what do I do? I've just earned this credential essentially, and I'm questioning everything. I'm not sure if this is how I want to spend my time. And I was volunteering myself for an association in that particular space. And that's how I learned about the field of associations and ultimately fell into an educational role for a healthcare organization after that, sort of worked my way into over a period of time serving 6 different healthcare organizations from clinical laboratory managers all the way now to interventional radiologists. And I was serving as an executive director for a nursing society, a nursing organization prior to SIO, and the opportunity came available. I don't think I was at all particularly skilled necessarily to take this on. Part of my interest in it and endeavor was I had recognized through the nursing organization that I was working for the capacity and interest I had in building teams and partnership with boards. And this particular organization was in a position where they needed someone to take them to the next step. And I didn't know that I could do it at the time. I still question that on a regular basis, frankly. But we mutually tried it out. And here we are 5 years later. So that was in 2020 when I joined SIO. They established themselves as a medical specialty organization in 2017. So when I came on board, they were very new. They're still very young, but really right at the beginning of the pandemic at that time, a lot of change going on in the marketplace in general. And so my entry, I guess, doubled down on the change at that period of time.
Jena, I interview many CEOs and executive directors on this podcast, and almost every single one of them talks about governance as a key factor to their success, as in if there's a good relationship between the chief staff exec and the board, and they're working together in partnership and they kind of understand their roles, the organization, like there's no stopping them. It sounds like you've got something really good going here at SIO. So tell us about that. How are you fostering great relationships with your board and your board chair?
I would agree with that comment that it is so important. And I've seen, as many of us have, what happens when it's not working well and the unstoppable nature of what happens when it is. And it's really hard, I think, to describe the magic that happens when things just click. What I really have prioritized since I was with that nursing organization, other observations I had when I was in different management roles for other organizations, even prior to that, is the time and attention paid to building relationships just at a very basic level, getting to know people individually, their stories, what matters to them, how they want to communicate, what their vision is, and really trying to get underneath what they believe the future state should look like. I find that fascinating personally when someone can articulate to you, I know what I want. This is how I believe we need to achieve it. And I think that is partly where the partnership with SIO has been successful. It's been hard work to build that, but there's been a lot of time that I've spent, that the board has spent mutually, and the care around both of us wanting this to be successful, articulating that early and making that value known, I think is partly why we've been able to work through good and difficult conversations at the same time and work through these problems together. One of the things I find so inspiring, frankly, about the interventional radiologists and that I've shared with others is that their history, just who they are by design, is they will find a way. They have literally invented some therapies that are new on the scene that weren't there 50 years ago. And you don't get there without being resilient and without pushing limits. And you can't really push limits well and partner with others if you can't communicate.
Mm.
The relationship building piece that I've learned from them has inspired me to try to be a better communicator and a better leader and prioritize that. And it does take a lot of time, but the benefits on the backside have been enormous in terms of watching SIO's growth.
Well, on a practical basis, what does this look like? What are you doing to really foster these good relationships?
Well, I spend a lot of time on the phone.
Okay.
On calls. I prioritize my leadership meetings. That's part of my weekly schedule. I spend time when I'm at conferences getting to know people in their circle, not just them directly, but who is important to you? Who do you want me to know?
Ah.
And really paying attention to how they build connections and foster relationships. And I began to model that myself. I noticed that they value in person time, that matters to them. So I make that a priority as much as I can. It's impossible for any one person to lift this themselves. So this is really a value state for our entire team. And we really take time and care when we're together in person. We make that meaningful. But understanding how they have built relationships has been a motivator for me to really understand what is the best way they appreciate communicating. What can I learn from that? And that has taken substantial time to be able to do, but it has been a huge benefit to be able to understand like what are the outcomes of that, because it's established a trust that I don't think I would have been able to build if I had not really been paying attention to the communication style and the values of these physicians.
Well, that is fantastic advice. Let's turn to SIO. You say that you're a rapidly growing organization experiencing exponential growth. Man, do my listeners love to hear that. Talk to us about that. What does exponential growth look like?
Well, for SIO, it looks like since I've joined the organization in 2020, there has been about a tripling in membership size.
Oh my God, congratulations.
Certainly taken a village to hit those numbers, but that is a reflection of the reputation that the society has been building over time. So again, I would kind of go back to the importance that they have placed on building relationships, communicating the value of their therapies to the community at large, not just to each other. And what we've seen as an effect of that is globally, not just domestically, the organization expanding its reach and the reputation starting to accelerate, partners wanting to work with the society, members finding engagement. These physicians are so relationally driven. It matters to them to place volunteers in the right roles.
Hmm.
And that has been a building block over time. We found a place for 5 members and then 10 and then 20. And then we had multiple committees and multiple international chapters. And slowly over time, you go from just a few people who are starting this organization now to nearly 1,500 members. And while that may seem small in numbers to some people out there listening, because, when we're talking about associations, that can be seen as kind of a small number. But when you understand that the community didn't really exist in the same way without SIO corralling this specialty together and the mountains that they've been able to move as a result of that, it's significant.
Hmm.
From a membership perspective, that's one metric that we use, and the growth that the society has been able to enable with special projects and strategic initiatives have dovetailed nicely with the increase we've seen in membership.
Well, talk to us about some of these programs that you've sponsored or initiated.
A couple of the strategic projects that SIO has been involved in building, I'll speak to one area in particular, has been the build state of their clinical research efforts. So SIO is currently running now 2, but as of end of 2024, just one. So this has been a growth story all by itself, clinical trial. And one of the interesting things about this structure is that the design of it really came about by the society verbalizing and pushing again, to find a way, a gap in evidence in a therapeutic space, and knowing that this was an area that SIO had to lead. There was no one individual company necessarily, or maybe physician, that was likely going to put out a study that would help change the standard of care.
Oh.
A technique called microwave ablation. And trying to find stories and examples of how do you build an infrastructure for a clinical study that has such a high potential for risk was really hard. I didn't find one ultimately, and really had to lean on the board to help educate me on how do we build a structure that is going to make this successful and meet the mission and goal of what running a clinical trial means.
Wait, so hang on. You're running a clinical trial. I mean, usually you think about pharmaceutical companies running trials or universities or big health systems, but it's the society running the clinical trial. So how does that work?
Yeah, the society is the sponsoring entity of the clinical study. So, in place of examples that you just shared, a company or an individual research organization, the society is the named sponsor. And so, how we got that done was by raising funds through grant mechanisms that ultimately support the project. And then SIO is the ownership of the scientific content, management of the protocol, and ultimately the lead voice in running that particular project. So it does require its own business modeling to be able to put that together, because it's a project all into itself that can be all consuming. And as I said, has a high potential for risk, extremely high reward if it goes well. But clinical research is not association management.
Right.
And so appending this into the mission and the infrastructure of the society is very unique. I haven't seen a lot of examples of this done in other places. And what we have been able to do is try to put together a model that is still growing, and we're learning from it live and in real time. But SIO they're not in the business of we're just going to run a clinical trial to run a clinical trial. They're picking gaps in evidence that need to be addressed. And it's better to address that from a society perspective in an agnostic way that puts the field first. And the body to do that really is a medical specialty organization with multiple voices, within the society that can get behind that. And it's a much more powerful statement in medicine when you can do it that way with the team versus maybe a single entity running it. It has more potential for bias. And this really helps us dissolve that concern when it's run by a medical specialty organization.
Jena, how are you funding a clinical trial? This can't be an inexpensive endeavor.
No, clinical research is quite expensive. That's not news to anyone.
Right.
The model that has been successful for SIO has been to work on lobbying grant funding from various sources. And that has been through privatized funding for the society and partnering with organizations and companies that believe in the mission of what SIO is doing and have an interest in seeing the studies be successful. And so it aligns with their business interests as well. If the endpoints in the protocol, exploratory or objectives, really are meeting their needs as well, it's a win for them. And they are funding through a grant process, not only the spirit of the project, but the actual ability for SIO to pool dollars together and be able to lift something so large that actually is a cost sharing mechanism. Otherwise, the burden would be on one particular entity. And in the case of the acclaim trial, the tribute trial is similar. The two that the societies are running, I mean, these are north of $5 million projects. And so having that kind of price tag on one particular entity is hefty. And that would take years and years and years to be able to plan for, which is partly why SIO tried to answer that need, because continuing to wait for changes in guidelines is something we need to advance now. And the only way to do that is to put a team together to move that forward. So that's been the design that's worked for us. I know that that's not the end of the story. There will probably be other models as the society grows that we will explore. But right now, that's the mechanism that has been successful for us.
Well, you've got something also called the Clinical Trial Collaborative, which is a research community. And is that related to the clinical trials that you are running? Or is that something totally separate?
It is separate, but the spirit of it came about by understanding the need that we were trying to achieve through the clinical studies itself. So these are, by the studies that the society is running, the interventional radiologists that are on the protocol are seasoned in running clinical studies. And there's a lot to that. It's not just the scientific knowledge, it's the operational knowledge, how to motivate and corral and work within your own infrastructure and politics at your site. There are a lot of complex pieces that are not necessarily scientific education. That is structural education on how to navigate your own ecosystem to make a clinical trial successful. That is a skill that is taught over time. It's not easy to teach. You often learn by observing. If you are at an institution where this has been successfully done and you have a mentor, you really have a leg up. And so, what we found in the community is we have so many physicians that are positioned to be successful in running trials that simply don't have the knowledge or access to these mentors. So, how do we develop that and create a community where they get the education, which is part of the CTC or the Clinical Trial Collaborative? It is a certificate program that provides education, foundational knowledge for a principal investigator to basically be a site and learn how to activate this type of work. And then the other piece of it is a database that allows these PIs to prepare information and answer some questions, both for themselves and the qualifications of the research team that supports them. That gives us knowledge sharing for the whole community. So physicians can go in there themselves and say, I'm interested in maybe designing a study, but I need a partner in this part of the country, or I need someone with this particular expertise. They could do that. It will eventually be available to industry partners to match up sites that they would like to partner with to run some novel studies that they may not have had access to before. So it's going to be a really exciting opportunity to watch unfold, because we know that we have the appetite, but what this has been is learning from the information we've gathered from the acclaim trial and others, and just the interest in the space with SIO. This has been a way to answer a big need in the community.
Wow. So both of these things are really positioning SIO as kind of the place to be, because you're saying we're going to run these trials because we feel like there's a need. And now we're going to empower the next generation of researchers to do their own clinical trials. So you're kind of setting the field up for an explosion of research and clinical trials, which will hopefully lead to like an explosion in therapies.
Well, that would be great if that was the if that was the outcome.
That's the vision, right?
Absolutely. That's the vision.
Wow.
What the society has done, and I have to give credit to the organization's board, and in particular, several members of our current executive team that really had the vision for articulating this is what we're hearing. We're hearing this across the physician community that there are people who either have the skills and feel like they are not available enough or don't have a mechanism to make themselves available to partner on research, or we have industry partners that don't know how to find them
Mm.
and are just so used to working with the medical oncology community, for example, or other places that are pretty typical to go for clinical research. And so, how do you find the interventional radiologist that knows how to run a trial like what you're hoping to design? That is really the vision of where this came from. I know it will be successful. It's going to take us a little bit to build it. It launched this last January at the annual scientific meeting. And over the past couple of weeks, we now have over 80 investigators in that database. And that's been a lot of work, to be able to get to those numbers. But by slow measurement of setting these milestones that we have for the project over the next year, I know we're going to get to where the organization wants to be. But that is the goal, is that we are able to train the next generation and really create a flywheel effect that will empower the field to grow and will get these therapies to patients faster, easier access, less barriers.
This doesn't sound slow to me. It sounds like you all are just a powerhouse, and no wonder there's been a growth in membership and a growth in reputation, because this is the place to be if you're involved in interventional oncology. Jena, before we go, what advice would you give to a chief staff exec who is at an organization that is experiencing this kind of exponential growth? Because sometimes this kind of growth can kill an organization.
It definitely can. And I would be not honest with you if I was positioning an answer as the fact that I know exactly how to navigate this, because I'm still really trying to figure that out myself. This has definitely been a momentum story, if anything else. And it's been quite a ride to watch all of this develop and the flywheel effect, start to really take traction. It's really inspiring. It's also really easy to get caught up in that and not make time for yourself, and then kind of lose why you're doing what you're doing. And that has a tendency to drain all the gas in the tank. And that's something that I've struggled with for sure. The advice I was given recently, actually, that has, I think, crystallized how maybe I've navigated this and what I'm still trying to do, is definitely open communication with your board. I mean, part of establishing the trust relationship that I have has enabled me to have those conversations around resourcing and needs and what we can do and what we can't and how to work through that. But someone once told me, if you can learn by the rules, you begin to play by the rules, then you can win by the rules, and then you can change the rules.
Wow.
That is something that has stuck in my mind. And I don't know if I've done that well. I have so much to learn of how to navigate that. But I have watched the physicians I work with do that. And that's been a template for me of picking and choosing and prioritizing how we manage the growth and how we manage the pause. You need both in order to climb a mountain. I heard a story recently from someone who shared with me they had been talking to a mountain climber climbing Mount Everest, like these big mountains. And the way you get there is actually by creating these base camps and retreating. Once you get to a certain point, you have to actually go back down. That's been a visual. I just heard this the other week, but I thought about that with how well we've done that and how much we need to practice that type of behavior, because that's difficult to do when there's so much growth. The tendency is to not pause. And I'm fortunate to have the relationship I do with this board to have those conversations about taking that time. But it's a challenge because these are entrepreneurs as well as doctors. And I'm inspired by their work. So it's mission driven. Everyone wants this to be successful at the end of the day. But I think that ultimately the true test for organizations that are facing this kind of growth is their ability to retreat when they need to. And that's definitely a process in action for the society right now, but I'm honored to be a part of their story.
Jena, fantastic advice all around. Congratulations on your success. You got to come back next year and tell us about how 2025 went and how all the clinical trials are doing, because you're doing some really interesting, innovative things that I've not heard of before. And I think my listeners are going to be really excited.
Thanks, Joanna. Appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Associations Thrive. We're so glad to have you here. You know, my personal mission and the mission of my company, Matrix Group International, is to help associations and nonprofits increase membership, generate revenue, and thrive in the digital space. I want to hear stories of how your organization is thriving in today's challenging landscape. Please apply to be on my show by going to podcast.matrixgroup.net. By the way, do you need help with a digital initiative? Maybe it's a website redesign, a new membership database, or a hybrid meeting that you're planning. I'd love to connect with you. Please visit the Matrix Group website at matrixgroup.net. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Associations Thrive. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, post a comment, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Bye!